Hello everyone! In light of recent events across the United States and Canada and all over the world for the Black Lives Matter movement, I decided to start my YouTube channel talking about mysterious cases within my country, Canada. I am a curious cat, and this channel will be about anything I am curious about. So if you're interested in true crime, history, mythology, movies, literature, and social sciences, press that subscribe button because I will likely be posting videos on those broad topics. This case came in the midst of the Black Lives Matter protests on the morning of June 4th. So let's begin. Chantel Moore was a 26-year-old from a First Nations reserve near Tofino, BC. She grew up in Nanaimo in Port Alberni. Recently, she moved from Edmundston to New Brunswick just a few months ago to be closer to her mother and her 6-year-old daughter. 2 months ago, she celebrated her 26th birthday. On the day of her death, a friend of hers in Toronto called the police after seeing some odd Facebook posts or messages. He was concerned for Chantel's well-being. He was worried that she was being harassed, and he was scared for her safety. The Edmundston police sent an officer to her apartment to perform a wellness check. A wellness check means sending an officer to assess the mental and physical well-being of a person. The time of the incident was around 2:30 a.m. on June 4th. The officer went to Chantel's downtown apartment and says that they were confronted by a knife and had no choice but to defend himself. So he shot a distressed woman 5 times. Edmundston Police Force Inspector Steve Robinson told reporters Thursday that he didn't believe the officer attempted to use non-lethal force. At first, the officer went on the scene and all of a sudden, the person just exited the apartment with a knife and was attacking the officer. This is what Steve told reporters on Thursday. Chantel died at the scene. Reporters were told that the scene between the officer arriving and shooting was not known, but it happened really quickly. A CBC article, the news release states resuscitation was attempted, but the woman died at the scene. Robinson said that he didn't think the officer attempted to use non-lethal force. Not that I know of, he said, but the investigation is going to cover that. The Edmundston police have asked an independent agency to investigate whether the police officer's actions complied with the policing standards. Chantel's death sparked outrage across the country. Throughout Chantel's community on Vancouver Island, among the national Indigenous leaders and federal politicians in Ottawa. Her grandmother said that Miss Moore was small in stature and could not have endangered a police officer to the point where he needed to use lethal force.
She was no threat to anybody. I've never known her to be aggressive or mean to anybody.
Family members were told Moore was shot 5 times.
Like, why would you have to shoot somebody 5 times?
Her death has drawn national attention at a time of increased scrutiny on the use of force by police in Canada and the U.S.
Quebec's independent police watchdog is now investigating the incident. Now that it seems that there are no witnesses to the case, I've looked into a lot of articles and no witnesses show up, but the idea that a police that is meant to perform a wellness check on a young woman who is at risk, by the sounds of what her friend was stating, and her friend was really concerned for her safety, so I'm just only assuming. But I'm wondering, how does this lead to her death when the goal is to offer a wellness check? And if she's coming out to attack, why wouldn't you use a non-lethal way to help her? I don't blame her family and the community for feeling this outrage due to this. In this Star article, it said that Steve Robinson appeared to chuckle in response to the question about how many times Moore had been shot. The police called it a poor reaction on camera. in a statement, which to me just seems tone deaf. What an odd reaction to have. Like, how dehumanizing is it to hear that a police officer killed your friend or daughter, and during the interview, the inspector chuckles in response to a very serious question about how many times this poor woman was shot, which was 5 times, if I didn't say that already. Just to elaborate on mental health. Mental health is a serious topic for people, and it's so stigmatizing. And I find it really sad to know that if you call the police to check on your friend's mental and physical well-being, that it could result in her death. Wellness checks should not lead to death. People are very vulnerable when they're going through a mental health episode. And the idea of this happening to people is so disheartening. In this Global News article, it states that Vancouver police are forced to attend mental health and wellness checks because there are limited resources to call on other professionals, but that officers are not trained to handle these situations properly. We do have untrained or improperly trained people attending these calls, being police who don't have the tools to de-escalate, whose main tool is force. They're also coming with these negative preconceptions of what someone with mental health issues look like, acts like, responds to with them. And interactions with police can often end up escalating the situation. And this article states that it leads to a disproportionate number of Black and Indigenous Canadians dying and being hurt by police. Imagine being in a really bad place mentally. You're feeling really unsafe, and then you are met by someone who's attending, who is armed in a uniform, who is meant to catch criminals, and who is trained to perceive things as threatening. Or you may have interactions that may have led you to believe rightfully that they could threaten your safety. There's no doubt that police violence, police attendance at mental health calls does disproportionately affect Black, Indigenous, and other racialized people. There are a myriad of reasons for that, ranging from lived experiences to intergenerational trauma. But again, for those reasons, police are absolutely the most inappropriate people to come and respond to crisis. And I agree with that. I think that, police are trained to stop crime. They're trained to stop violence. But it really makes me wonder how much they're aware of mental health and the stigma involved that it affects so strongly. Like, I just think back to him chuckling and how if this poor girl was going through a mental health episode, maybe she was manic, maybe she was paranoid, and she just didn't feel safe, and when you end up in those states, people perceive you as dangerous, but it's often not the case. The case is that they're trying to keep themselves safe, and because they don't feel safe, their mind is telling them they're not safe. And to open the door to a police officer feeling threatened by you and proceeds to pick up a gun and point at you with it and then shoot you 5 times. It just doesn't seem like a just reason to kill someone.
Very interested in trying to find out how the investigation is going to happen, because this was another Indigenous woman shot by a police officer. We need answers.
The shooting occurred just over a year after the release of the final report of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls.
Along with the pain become a lot of the anger issues, and of understanding why and how come.
Martin Watts sits in his backyard in Port Alberni, wearing a t-shirt with a photo of Lisa Marie Young, his wife's niece, a 21-year-old woman who disappeared in 2002. He also knew Chantel Moore.
Love people. Her favorite saying.
Let me just say that racism involved with Black, Indigenous, and people of color exists here in Canada. There are groups of people that want to say otherwise, to which I see them as blinded by their own privileges, because there is not only Black Lives Matter movements in Canada, but there is also an epidemic that currently affects Indigenous peoples of Canada and in the United States. For Canada, it's called a Canadian national crisis. There has been a mass movement in the works to raise awareness of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. While a number of Indigenous women who have gone missing is estimated to exceed 4,000, the report admits that there are no firm numbers that can ever be established, because I'm pretty sure they didn't start establishing it till like around 2010 for the stats. For years, activists and Indigenous people have pushed for the government of Canada to inquire into the number of Indigenous women who have either gone missing or have been killed. The systemic racism in Canada exists, creating a bias against Indigenous people who have gone through so much intergenerational trauma. They are affected socially, economically, and politically marginalized, and often are frequent targets for hatred and violence. There's many historical factors that led to today, such as the legacy of colonialism, the history of trauma caused by abuses under Canada's residential school system, and simultaneously, while conforming to becoming a Canadian, the government involved completely dismantled their culture. It's a disheartening thought, but it's true. It's absolutely true. Chantel was known to be a bright of sunshine and spoke about getting involved with becoming a counselor. She was working to make some changes in her life. This included going to college and seeing more of her daughter, who was being raised by her mother at the time. She even started buying textbooks to prepare for college.
Justice would be to find out the truth, what really happened.
As the investigation continues, I hope that Chantel's family will find some closure and some justice. This was supposed to be just a wellness check on a young mother starting a new transition into her life. Chantel was known for her favorite saying, "Stay golden," and Chantel was loved by her family and friends, and I believe she deserves justice, and her family deserves to know the real truth. I gathered some links in the description box below to donate to Chantel's family, and some resources for organizations whose mission is to bring awareness and help advocate and inspire women and families of many Indigenous nations. Thank you for watching A Curious Cat, and let me know down in the comments below if you want to hear some more stories like this. I know I'm very curious to learn more about it myself, so be on the lookout for a future video related to that. Also, like and subscribe and stay curious.